Well, now we have a very special guest. She is author Kathy Isaac, and Kathy has written a book, Don't Tell, based on the real life story of a woman whose background of abuse mirrors her own. She's here today to share about this incredible journey of writing the book and to encourage us that trauma isn't the end of the story. Welcome to 700 Club Canada, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, this is a great book, a hard book. It's an emotional read, but it covers some very challenging issues: incest, sexual abuse, adoption, abortion, mental illness, and homelessness. So can you just explain why it was so important that you helped Joanie tell her story?
Yeah, I met Joanie in Chicago. Our church had gone on a mission trip to Chicago, and I had walked into the office as Joanie was finishing up her conversation with her psychologist, and I just got a little insight to what her story was. So she told me a little bit more, and right away I just knew that her story was a story that needed to be told. So fast forward almost 20 years later, I talked to her again and I said, Joanie, why isn't your story being told? Why isn't it out there? And she said she just didn't have anybody who would write it. So I just offered to write it. And she asked me if I, had ever written a book before. And I said, no, but God gives you the tools that you need to do the work that he puts in front of you.
Oh, and I love that, because there's nothing more powerful than a story. And so thank you for taking the time to capture that. I think there's power in that. And in the story, in the book, I love how Joanie realizes that it's God who created her and knows her so well, and that he would meet her right where she was. So why do you think this was such a special realization for her?
Well, Joanie had her father's child when she was 15 years old. And she was kicked out. Well, she left her home because it wasn't a safe place to be. Her son ended up being adopted. And you can just imagine the mental illness and the impact that had on Joanie. And so she went away for a number of years and then ended up having to come back to care for her ailing father, who was the one who had raped her multiple times when she was young. And it's such an impactful story that reaches so many people. She became homeless. She left home again. She had lost everything. But when she found Jesus, Jesus gave her more than she could ever expect back. So the first half of the book is a very dark, difficult read, but the second half of the book is really where her life begins.
Yeah, and I think so many of our viewers can identify with the reality that trauma has a way sometimes of restricting us, limiting us, even maybe defining us, and we feel like we'll never break free. And so this is an amazing story of what God can do when we let him define us and give us identity. And so what do you think is the underlying message of Joanie's story, and how did forgiveness play a part in that?
Redemption is really the underlying story, but forgiveness, you really need to forgive in order to move on. And forgiveness is a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. And Joanie, you can only imagine that it took a while for her to be able to forgive. And for myself, the same thing. I was molested when I was a child, about the same age as when Joanie started being raped by her father, so around 7 years old. And for me, it was when I realized that Jesus' death paid for sin. He paid for all sin. So that included the sin of the man who molested me. It included the sin of Joanie, of her father. It includes everybody's sin. So when you start at that point, it's so much easier to move on. It wasn't my burden. It wasn't Joanie's burden to carry anymore. So when you lay it at the feet of Jesus, then you are able to move on and realize that he has so much for you. Romans 8:28 says, "We are confident that God is able to orchestrate everything to work towards something good and beautiful when we love him and accept his invitation to live according to his plan." So when we do that, when we lay our burdens down and are willing to um, move in the direction that He wants us to move, He just has such wonderful things in store for us.
Oh, I think that's so powerful. And I, even the title of your book, Don't Tell, I think so many people live with secret pain, secret hurt. And I think the enemy loves to keep it hidden. And so when we can actually confess that and reveal that and allow God to heal it, it's like a wound. If you keep it covered, it can't be healed. And so I think that's what's so powerful about your story. And thank you for being so courageous in telling it and being willing to share that with others, because I think that will bring a lot of freedom. And so I know you speak a lot about living fearlessly and risking it all for Jesus. And so what is living fearlessly now that you've experienced Jesus and his forgiveness? What does that mean for you really quickly?
Yeah, it really, like you say, it gives you freedom when you realize that you can trust God. My granddaughter is visiting us, and she's 2 years old, and just to watch her fearlessly jump into the arms of somebody she trusts, and when you put away the despair of your life, the baggage that you carry, then and you learn to trust Jesus in everything, then you have the freedom to do so much. Joni had the freedom to become summa cum laude of her class in university. She became a teacher. She went to Africa as a missionary. Her life was just a total 180 from what it was when she began. And that's what freedom in Jesus will bring.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for writing this book. And thank you for encouraging us all to trust God, jump fearlessly into his arms, because that's where we find our freedom. Thanks for being here with us today.
You're welcome.